Well, so this afternoon, we're focusing on Ghana's security. The West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism is warning that Ghana is at risk of terrorism exploitation. The group actually explains that with more than 53% of all ECOWAS states experiencing insurgencies, plus the pervasive overspill phenomenon in neighboring countries such as Burkina Faso, Ghana's borders region are a key concern for security experts. Well, the group has been breaking down the figures and talking about the implication for Ghana's security in terms of terrorism. We can just bring you excerpts of what it is that the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism has been talking about. In terms of the threat, it notes that the threat has been menacingly and quickly descending from the Sahel region towards the coastal states in the last 5 years. So that has been the trend. But then going forward, we know as well that 53% of all ECOWAS states as we speak are grappling with terrorist violence. There's also the key point that they're raising, which has got to do with Ghana, which currently has over 352 unresolved chieftaincy conflicts. Now, they believe, and I'm talking about the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism, they believe that the protracted chieftaincy and ethnic conflicts that we have within our country, specifically those located within the border regions and border towns, constitute a direct threat and an opportunity for extremist exploitation. That's one of the key points that they're talking about. Beyond that as well, they're looking at the fact that the Global Terrorism Index 2019 and 2020 as well is indicating that almost all cases or countries which experience terrorist attacks have had 97% of all of those fatalities occurred in countries with pre-existing conditions, such as the chieftaincy conflicts that they're referring to, 352 of them which have not been resolved here in Ghana. Then they go ahead to talk about the fact that Ghana's proximity to these countries, we know of Burkina Faso, which is already experiencing some turmoil. You know, the northern part as well has been experiencing some security challenges. Benin is also there. Togo is very close to us. In fact, it has one of its busiest frontiers with us into Ghana. And then parts of Ivory Coast as well is also experiencing some attacks in terms of security threats and all of that. Now, these incidents are exposing us, the country, to more recruitment in terms of terrorism, and that could lead to an attack or an exploitation situation, which the report is talking about. Beyond that as well, we know that government has been attempting to respond to this in the last 5 years, which the report is pointing out. They talk about the first operation which government launched, which is the Operation Conquered Fist, followed by the exercise Eagle Claw in 2020 as well, to empower security agencies to deal with possible or multiple terror attacks in the country. But there was another attempt also which involved Ghana, Burkina Faso, Togo, and then Cote d'Ivoire as well, which is known as the Operation Kundalugu, which was launched. They had the first phase, second phase, and then the third phase as well. There's also the 2017 Accra Initiative, which government launched way back about some years ago, 5 years ago, to deal with this situation using the interagency cooperation and then coordination, as well as intelligence sharing amongst member countries in the region. These are some of the attempts that government has made over the past 5 years. But you need to know this. This is a caution from the West African Security Center for Counter-Extremism. They are warning that in the end, what will be crucial is that the overall effectiveness of Ghana's response will be determined by the state's willingness to recognize that the battle against terrorism and the drivers that underpin it cannot be won by the battlefield alone. So they talk about some internal measures which needs to be adopted by the national security in dealing with all of these matters. But let's find out why the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism is raising this concern. Joining me now is Mukhtar Momoni Mukhtar, Executive Director for the Center. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. He's at one of the border towns, also monitoring the situation as we speak. So he's joining us on phone. Richard Kumado as well is a security and fraud consultant, joining us via Zoom. Richard, we'll talk to you shortly, but let's get the basis of this report from the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism itself, which is raising these key concerns. Mukhtar, welcome to the program. So why are you raising this alarm, particularly at this time?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and good afternoon to the listeners. So this report is a report that looks at Ghana's exposure to violent extremism within the scope of the threat of extremism descending to, towards coastal states from the Sahel region. And we are looking at the exposure of the country to violent extremism, both from the external and internal sources. We've looked at the vulnerabilities or the drivers that could lead individuals to be recruited or to fall to extremist, violence. And so issues of unresolved chieftaincy conflict and ethnic conflict issues to do with governance challenges, economic challenges, youth unemployment, and what we consider to be the drivers of radicalization are very pervasive. And if you look at the threat from external sources, Ghana has never been exposed this much to violent extremism. Historically, if you look at what is happening now, this is a very different reality. We are seeing Burkina Faso sinking deeper and deeper to extremist violence. We are seeing spillover effect or phenomenon of violent extremism affecting the northern borders of Mali, the northern borders of Burkina Faso with Mali, same with the northern borders of Benin and Togo. We are talking about Cote d'Ivoire, which has also fallen to extremism in the northern borders as well as the eastern border with Burkina Faso. And so we have, as a country, Ghana has been effectively fully encircled by terrorism or terrorist violence from all angles. Our direct neighbors are currently battling with the threat. This has never been before. And so this is a reality that we need to highlight and also highlight government's commitment to deal with the threat, especially harvesting the support of local community and civil society actors to ensure that we prevent this from happening on our space. We are the only country within the sub-region, within this space, that is yet to experience attack. And the point where we need to raise alarm is not when we are attacked. When we are attacked, that will be too late to do anything to prevent it or to stop it from happening. Historically, no nation has done so well, has gone, moved better from attacks. And so we do not need that to happen before we highlight the vulnerabilities that could lead us into a similar fate that our neighbors are currently dealing with.
And I must point out that what we were giving to our audience was largely the external factors. But then you go ahead in the report to talk about some internal happenings which could trigger this event as well.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Yeah, I was talking about the fact that we're pointing to the external factors which you raised in your report. But then what's also important is that within the report itself, you talk about some internal happenings that could also trigger this attack.
Yeah, so we are looking at internal factors or internal drivers. One of the biggest issues has to do with the issue of widespread chieftaincy and ethnic conflicts. Ethnic conflicts and chieftaincy conflicts represent the single biggest source of fatalities and violence in this country. We have huge numbers of unresolved conflicts, and we have over 352 unresolved chieftaincy and ethnic conflicts in this country. And a good number of those are, featuring in the northern parts of the country. And we have, the very prolonged chieftaincy conflict in Boku and several parts of the northeastern part of the country, that border countries that are experiencing attacks. And in this, we note the very high exploitative capacity of extremists to exploit issues like this, vulnerabilities such as conflicts, and weaponize them for their extremist violence. And there's a report currently that is published by the Global Terrorism Index for 2020-2021 that reveals that over 97% of all terrorism fatalities during that period happened in countries that are currently dealing with conflict, countries that are already in conflict. It tells you the exploitative capacity of extremists to harvest or weaponize existing conflicts for their violence. And on that level, we need to be very, very conscious of that in looking at the conflicts that we are currently dealing with.
All right, then,
so on that same way, we are calling on government to quickly, as much as, as fast as possible, resolve conflicts such as the Boku conflict. If you look at the proximity of Boku to the theater of violence within the sub-region.
Right. We'll talk about your exercise, some of the other activities you're engaged in as we speak, monitoring the development. But let's bring in Richard Kumado as well. He's a security consultant, also monitoring developments in terms of our vulnerabilities when it comes to terrorism. Richard, so you've heard from the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism. What's also your take on this? Are we that close to an attack?
Somewhere February, each year, I travel across Ghana 4 times to do what we call security risk assessment. And I've also had the opportunity of working closely with the counter-terrorism unit of the Ghana Police Service and many of the guys within that particular periphery. I can understand my brother Mumuni and the job he's doing up north. Looking at the testimony recently that some of the guys from Burkina Faso has actually descended into Boko to take part in some of the upheavals and the security breaches that took place there, I can understand. But it's important to say that when it comes to countries and what will facilitate terror attacks, it differs from one country to the other. We might be having chieftaincy issues here that have not been resolved, but in some of these countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Cote d'Ivoire, it is far from chieftaincy. What is driving the issues of insecurity we are seeing, for which terrorists want to take advantage, it is far from chieftaincy issues. That is one point I want to make. But by and large, even the National Security Minister indicated that the issue of terror is very close to our borders. I would want to sound caution that let's begin to educate our people more, what to do, what not to do, what are their targets, and what we can do to salvage the situation.
Well, but he talks about how the World Report on Terrorism points to the fact that almost about 97% of cases of terrorism occurs in places where there's pre-existing conditions of conflict. So we cannot underestimate that 352 cases of unresolved chieftaincy disputes, which is being talked about in this report.
Definitely. There are chieftaincy issues from south to north, west to east. And I think we will need to engage the House of Chiefs properly in a proper dialogue manner. And I know the integrity of some of the people who represent the regions when it comes to the House of Chiefs. And I think their experience must come to bear. Having said that, it is also important to consider what is driving the issues of chieftaincy disputes in our country and how it affects the overall security management in our country. I have no doubt that our security agencies have done well, except the Yendi issue that translates into death. The Boko one, we have not been able to resolve it. We have all of them all over the place, and they are in various dimensions and various degrees. We might need to quantify them and do a proper risk assessment of them, and where there are emergency cases of a threat that could trigger some of these things, we can look at it and address it.
All right, I'm glad that you're acknowledging that point. Let's bring in Muta as well and point at some more issues in the report to you. There's also the concern about how increasingly the youth are joining extremist groups such as ISIS. You point that out in your report. Tell us more about it.
Hello.
Yes, Mukhtar, I was asking about the point within the report which talks about the fact that more and more persons within the youth bracket in Ghana are joining extremist groups such as ISIS.
So the report points to the fact that a dozen number of young people have joined extremist groups in the past. We're talking about Ghana's exposure to it. What is the reality? So with the report features the fact that young people, at least 13 young people, are known to have left this country to join extremist groups beginning around 2015. And the fact that we have worked to dissuade a good number of them from leaving to join extremist groups from this country. So the report is highlighting that this is a reality in this country. We have no reason to doubt that we are immune to the threat of violent extremism, either from internal or external sources. I talked about the issue of conflict, or chieftaincy and ethnic conflict. Terrorism is a very complex security threat, and no one particular feature or factor can be used to explain why terrorism happens. It's usually a combination of factors. So chieftaincy or distinct chieftaincy conflicts are just one of the vulnerabilities We are looking at pervasive or widespread youth unemployment challenge. We are talking about issues that have to do with marginalization involving minority groups in the local space. If you remember, in the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've had to deal with the challenge of the Fulbe community being attacked, largely on the...
Unfortunately, we've lost Mukhtar there. Would engage him on some more matters in the report. But Richard, you're still with us. The point there about how the youth are joining extremist groups. And what's interesting is that the report links this to unemployment. How key is this nexus, and what do we need to address it generally?
No, definitely, job creation has become a major issue for many governments across the globe, and Ghana is not an exception. We always wish and pray that government to mobilize their national resources to create jobs for the teeming youth. Once they are not working, they become vulnerable for many of these recruitment agencies into the ICs and the rest. If you remember recently in the UK and America, one guy called Kote something, which speaks that he's a Ghanaian, has been sentenced to taking part in terrorism and all that. And nobody can dispute the fact that idle hands, the devil finds jobs for them. And unemployment is one of those key issues. This report has also come to highlight the fact that government must do more in that particular direction. It's a shared responsibility, and it's a core function national security must take seriously, particularly when it comes to the negative effects of unemployment and the tendency of our youth joining criminal gangs and behaving awkwardly, for which terrorism and coup d'etat and many of the security threats could be part of it. So I agree perfectly with my brother Mumuni on that one. What I'm saying is that let's consider this report in the holiest of it, and let national security and the police look at it. The areas they want to do something about it immediately, let them work at it. Other than that, chieftaincy is a major issue for us. Unemployment is a major issue. Our borders are shaking, and we will need to wake up to the responsibility.
Well, Mutare is back. Mutare, the point about your investigations into how these recruitments are done, are you able to point out if there are some agencies maybe underhand, working on the grounds, recruiting young people to join some of these groups that you talk about?
What is motivating young people to be recruited?
Yes, precisely.
Okay, so it's a combination of factors you're looking at. Like I pointed out, there isn't one factor or a particular factor that motivates individuals to be recruited, to extremist groups. It depends on the personality, the personal profile of the individual. It depends on the environment. It depends on the historical, experience of the person. So, for instance, we've got individuals who we have worked with. There's, for instance, a particular individual who was radicalized by ISIS whilst he was largely online. And looking at the person's profile, you're looking at issues that have to do with dysfunctional family background or dysfunctional social background. Somebody whose life right from the beginning, around the age of 7, did not have any feature of family in his upbringing. And so he struggled through life, through school, to a point where he became so vulnerable in his around 22, at the age of 22 years, that he got radicalized by ISIS. This is an individual influenced significantly by issues of poverty. It's an individual who was influenced significantly by a sense he wanted to have a sense of belonging. And so these factors are unique to this particular person, and it is very different from other individuals as well. But the issue of unemployment is key in many of the factors we've been dealing with. The issue of negative religious ideals is key regarding the individuals we have dealt with. And individuals have different unique situations in combination to these two major factors.
Well, this is why I bring in this aspect of the conversation. The Constitution itself, the Fourth Republican framework has been called into question. There are concerns about the need to reform the Constitution as part of dealing with this growth in anxiety and political turmoil. But the president himself appears to admit the fact that we're facing that imminent threat and Ghanaians should still be devoted to the issue of democratic governance. Well, he was speaking on the 30th anniversary of the 1992 Constitution. Let's take a listen to that, and then we'll open up that conversation.
We've had 5 presidents in the history of the Fourth Republic, with peaceful transfers of power from a governing to an opposition party on 3 separate occasions. Even when there was disagreement with the outcome of an election, it was the Supreme Court on 2 occasions, rather than the streets, that validated its result. We are arguably the most stable democracy in West Africa. On this day, the 30th anniversary of the referendum, whose votes ushered in the Fourth Republic, I urge all of us to renew trust in our democracy and bear in mind at all times the oft-cited statement that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. I say so because there are some who, for their own parochial and selfish interests, would want to see a return to the dark days of authoritarian rule, simply because, with no respect for the Ghanaian people, they are either unwilling to subject themselves or their vision to the open scrutiny of the Ghanaian people, or because they know they will be rejected by the Ghanaian people and thus seek a shortcut to office and power. Let us strengthen our resolve to resist such persons for our common good.
So resist that temptation of a coup d'etat. Richard, let me bring you in at this point. Some say, well, that's the president acknowledging the threats, but then talking about his factor, which has got to do with the internal political climate, as one of the key grounds for which a terror attack could happen or a military overthrow could happen here in the country.
Yeah, definitely. Brother, democracy in itself has some negative effects on how people are being governed and the kind of imaginations and the trends it can lead to. And I've always maintained the fact that democracy is far better than coup d'etat. Having said that, coup d'etats are not things you wish for or you wish away. You must always protect your borders, and you must always be resort in the monitoring mechanisms that ensure that national sovereignty is protected. One of the things we are doing in that regard in this particular report Mumuni has put out there, that we are discussing it. And the issues in the report are some of the things when we take seriously, the issue of coup d'etat will be the thing of the past. Having said that, I agree largely with the president that we should prefer democracy to any shortcut to governance. But blessed, there are various forms of democracies across the globe. As an African or as Africans, let's look at our democracies properly. Is it yielding the fruit? Are we making much gain out of these democracies? Are there some things we can do about it? Like some other people calling for the constitution to be reviewed or to be reformed or a change of constitution and a new one. What is wrong with our constitution that is not giving us the results? And do we necessarily need to change the whole constitution or reform it in order to get the results? How are we managing ourselves and how are we leading ourselves within the democratic space? These are some arguments. Soberly, we will need to look at it again. But largely, I agree with what the president said. This is the choice we are taking, and this is the path we've chosen, and we need to work at it speculatively and prudently, and that's the way to go.
Interesting point there, Richard Komado. Let me wrap up with you, Mumuni, on this. The spillover effect, you talk about that, but the president is asking us to resist such temptations. Which of them weighs in more for you?
Well, I think the president is spot on in terms of calling on citizens to uphold the Constitution and calling us to see the value in protecting our Constitution as opposed to, coup d'etats. I've always argued that the alternative to bad democratic governance is not a coup d'etat. It is better democratic governance. And so we need to take our Constitution, our model of democracy, and look at what are the challenges, what are the fault lines, what are the flaws we need to look at and change that to suit our reality. Our Constitution and our model of governance must respond to the reality and the needs and aspirations of our people. We are talking about a generation that is youth-led, youth-driven. How is our Constitution, how is our Constitution able to ensure that it provides the entitlements of citizenship to the local population? Those are key things we need to look at. And I do not agree that we need to throw away this constitution on the basis of the fact that some things are not going right. We need to retool it. We need to tweak it and ensure that it responds to the needs and aspirations of our people.
Well, I'm grateful. Mukhtar Momuni Mukhtar, Executive Director for the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism. Earlier you heard from Richard Kumado, Fraud and Security Consultant, joining us here on that conversation. But